Hey guys, and welcome to the Garage Strength Show. We have a amazing guest on for you today in Chris Peel. So Chris runs the the Move Better project on Facebook. It's an amazing kind of like rehab, prehab specialization coach. We get a lot of questions come up within the group and to ourselves kind of about injuries and what should I be doing to train around XYZ. And so we thought it'd be a wonderful opportunity to kind of get him on and talk all things to do with that for yourselves. So without further ado, here's Chris. And why don't you tell us a little bit kind of like about yourself, your background, kind of how did you get into like training in the field that you're in, and yeah, just tell us a bit about you.
Okay, so thank you for having me. You said I'm Chris. It's actually the Move Well project, and it kind of happened by accident. So my intro to training is being a great big fat kid, really, as a teenager, and the gym being like okay, I'm not a fat kid, I'm big, and then actually realising that all the people in there smaller than you, stronger than you, and then going, okay, well, how do I deal with this? How do I actually get big and or less fat? And that was my entry into training. I started working with other people. I've worked in gyms in some description since like 2002. So that gives you an idea that I'm old. And the rehab thing happened by accident. I was working with people and I worked with a few people who had injuries, just on an exercise referral basis, because I'd done the exercise referral qualifications as a personal trainer. And I started getting loads of referrals for injuries. And I just thought, well, I'm getting a bit of reputation for this, but I'm kind of winging it. I need to do this properly. So I went back to university, did a sports medicine masters. And I've been registered as a sports rehabilitator now for a few years and a specialist in sports rehab.
So how long were you being a PT? Because it sounds like you transitioned from, well, in essence, probably still a PT, but in a different kind of way with the area you work in. So how long were you sort of marching maybe the gym floor, doing your typical PT sessions, that you ended up specialising in the rehab side of things?
So my first gym job was in a proper spin disorders gym. And I mean like leaves in the corner, real proper spin disorders gym. But we're talking quite a serious gym. This was 2002 when I was at uni first time round. And there was guys in there who were shoulder pressing 70 kilo dumbbells. So they had to come in their own little group of three because nobody else could hand them 70 kilo dumbbells. They were bench pressing 5 plates a side every week, week in, week out. So that was the first place I got really exposed to sort of serious strength. Personal training wise, that was 2007. Because actually back then, personal training wasn't really a thing in the way it is now. There really wasn't much of it going on. It was very small amounts, and it seems a very, very sort of luxury product. And I think the way the whole, what I would consider to be like the heat generation, which won't mean anything now to anyone because Heat magazine isn't a thing, because magazines aren't a thing. But this whole sort of celebrity
doing nuts and stuff like that.
yeah. But this whole celebrity culture led to people spending more on things that for men, particularly, I think like. I always feel like the male equivalent of like the beauty industry absolutely exploding is like the sort of gym, physique, bodybuilding side of things exploding for the men. Mm-hmm. If you look at like what's happening sort of pop culture wise with like The Only Way is Essex and Love Island, this and the other, all of a sudden being in shape for a man, like visibly in shape, became a thing. And I think, that was sort of mid 2000s, and that really led to an explosion in the personal training market. And the first place I worked as personal trainer was Bicester in the Midlands, and then I worked delivering PT qualifications for a while. So I've been around a bit and done different jobs. I had a gym for a while, that didn't work out too well. Wasn't really a businessman in that sense.
Tough gig to have, owning a gym. Countless owners I've spoke to is just. It's rarely a happy story, shall I say?
Yeah. Well, it made me realise is I like working with people and doing like problem solving, which is what rehab is really, like problem solving with people. I didn't like problem solving like, how to get a toilet seat that doesn't fall off every week. That kind of problem solving.
Yeah, I mean, that's the stuff
How to deal with asshole members that keep damaging all your equipment.
Yeah. Those problems weren't for me. The injury problem solving, I like that.
Yeah, definitely, man. Cool. So you mentioned going back to university. That's quite, I don't know if brave is the right word, but that's a big commitment to make to going back. Because I mean, there's plenty of PTs in the industry who back themselves on their knowledge. It sounded like you had a really good base of knowledge, and what we call in the industry, what would you call? I don't know, street smarts. I don't know what the word is, like practical, on hands-on experience. What was the deciding factor to make you think I really want to go back to uni and really push this forward more?
I was getting asked to do a lot of things that I fell into like an ethical grey area where I was like, these people are injured. They are actually like injured. I feel like I can help them. I feel like I can help them sensibly without putting them at risk. But actually, all I'm doing really is I'm bouncing them back to the GP just to get a doctor's note saying they can do some form of low-level exercise, just to justify for insurance purposes that I can start with them and do some work with them. And I just thought, this just isn't right. It's just not actually right. You can't just make up your own competency, and you can't be unregulated, and it's just not all right. And now I just find it incredibly frustrating, because one of the things I see an awful lot of is that's massive in our industry, and it's massive in both therapy and in the training sector. Because what I didn't know till I did go back to uni is the difference between a sports therapist, a graduate sports therapist, a sports rehabilitator, a physiotherapist. I had no idea. So physio is like a protected title, and they are clinical. Graduate sports therapists, interesting one, because they're not actually recognised anywhere clinically, but they are competent clinically, in fairness, but they're not very well regulated. So tricky one. But anybody, if it's not a protected title, can go, yeah, I'm a sports therapist. Anybody can offer that. Anybody can say, I provide physical rehabilitation, because that's not protected as a title.
Same thing with like personal training. Like anybody can just decide they're going to be a personal trainer, and like I'm pretty sure you need a license to like cut hair in this country, but you can get somebody into a squat rack, load up 100 kilos on their back, and essentially break them for life with like no. The only thing is they could then sue you, and you're not insured.
Well, what you find,
there's no regulatory body that can essentially stop you from saying that you are a personal trainer. Is it the same thing for physical therapy then?
It's pretty much the same. Unless you're going to say I'm a physio, no, it's completely unregulated. So you've got guys doing a weekend course and touching people, and they're like going advertising and working with people.
That sounds so dodgy.
That ultimately is actually what it is, because literally the only evidence we can produce that says massage is actually particularly useful is that it gives you some form of neural feedback that makes you feel good in like an endorphin-y kind of like hormonal way. Otherwise, it's doing a whole heap of jack shit. So pretty much, you may as well go and get a hand job, because that gives you also a feel-good high. So what you're saying is,
why not do both? I was
going to say, let's set up a new qualification within Home Gyms UK. Free hand jobs for everyone.
Quite that up somewhere, but essentially, joking aside, obviously that's not entirely.
Yeah, I get the point you're making.
We've got this culture where people are going. It's bizarre. Like, I wouldn't drive my car that was making some kind of knocking noise to the garage and tell them what to do with it. I would drive it to the garage and say, "It's making some kind of knocking noise. What's up? What do you think you should do with it?" Yet we go to these weird therapists who've got like a list on the wall, like a menu of like different weird pseudo treatments, like cupping, needling, rubbing, electric, whatever, and you just get to pick one and say, try that on it. This area hurts, try this on it. And it's like, well, that's not. Where's the actual diagnosis? So the only person who's responsible for that is the therapist themselves. And much like the personal training side, if they're a teenager who lives at home in the mum's spare room, they haven't got anything to lose. So the risk of getting sued doesn't matter anyway, because they haven't, what are you going to sue for? The clothes on the back. So yeah, it's scary. And I suppose the only real way around it is to try and educate the public a little better. It's probably not a regulation thing, that the public needs to be more aware of who does what and who they should see, and be a little bit more savvy. That I think we all kind of have this like really quite nice naive belief that if you go and see somebody and ask them to do something they're not competent to do, they'll hold their hands up and go, yeah, I can't do that. Well, that's not the case when there's money involved. So private healthcare is a nightmare, because you'll turn up to somebody and say, this hurts, can you give it a rub? And go, 40 quid please. Yeah, I'll rub it. And it's like, well, why does it hurt? You're not competent to assess that. Send them away and get somebody who is competent to assess that to tell you. And if they say rubbing it might make you feel better, go and get it rubbed as well. Cool, that's fine. So I don't have a problem with people doing things as long as they're quite clear about what they are.
I think we've got very similar views across the whole thing. We've talked about this a few times on the podcast. People kind of, I'm just thinking about an example sprung to mind of a client of mine who would go to a former client who would go to the physio and tell them, it's this, you need to touch this and do that and go on. And the physio's like, never mind, I've been like gone through the masters, done everything, right? You tell me, I'll do that. It was just, he said it was a really bizarre encounter, but that was like another story. But I think we're very much a culture training. We want it to be fixed there and then. You go there, I've got this problem on my neck, rub it, and it's going to be fixed. Yeah, cool, like a massage gun. They exploded a couple of years ago. And it's almost like, yeah, I rubbed that into my, I used to do a lot of strongman competitions the last couple of years, and you couldn't lift without hearing a brrr the whole time you were training. It was just, oh my, really? And of course, they're all makeshift jigsaw guns, like the one I've got one, and it's just so loud. But I think people are expecting it fixed there and then go. It's not really what's caused it and why is it happening. No one seems to be interested in it.
You've got two things going on. You've got one, that nobody wants to change behaviour, which stems with diet. It's they want to be told how they can, what's the hack? What's the solution? What's the hack that means I can still continue to train like a complete idiot? I can still continue to not worry about whether I'm sleeping or not worry about whether my nutrition's actually sound or not worry about my hydration, not worry about my psychological stress levels, things that actually do matter. What adjunct can you do to me that means I don't have to change anything about the way I'm living my life? I don't have to change anything about the way I'm training, and I don't hurt. So, well, or the blindingly obvious that the way you're training is causing this. Maybe we need that. That needs to be part of the process. Like holistically, are you trying to progress too quickly? Are you trying to progress quicker than you can adapt? Because ultimately, the only outcome there is you either get ill or you get injured. So that's like general adaptation syndromes. Fundamentally, you are creating stress so that you adapt, so that you supercompensate and become better. If you're creating, ultimately creating stress ain't that complicated, is it? You create stress. If you're doing that too much too often, you're not giving yourself enough opportunity to recover and get better. That will result in something breaking, or you systemically breaking down and becoming ill. So nobody wants to hear that they're not a genetic super freak and they're probably not going to break the 501. So it's a nicer message to say, well, I'll rub it and it'll stop hurting. Oh, and again, it'll hurt next week because your program is still shy. So come back next week, I'll rub it again and you'll pay me again. So to a degree, I've got no issue with that happening. There's a damn good reason why, like, professional sports still employ soft tissue therapists. Because if you're doing something like, think of the Tour de France, which is on at the moment, you're out cycling however many miles a day for however many days end on end. You've got to get up in the morning and feel like you want to get on that bike more than you feel like you want to go on. So if somebody rubbing something that reduces inflammation to some degree potentially and makes you just feel a bit fresher the next day, you want that and you'll pay for that and you'll do that and it'll make you better at winning the race. However, that's a performance. That's the actual event. Yeah. In training, when you're training to adapt, inflammation is part of the adaptation process. So do you want to retard inflammation with a contrast bath and some massage? Probably not, because you've worked damn hard for that inflammation and you want that. If you're getting sore in areas that you're not directly training, then maybe there's something else happening. Maybe you need to speak to somebody to try and understand why, have you got some kind of weird compensation that's causing this? Do you need to do something specific for that area? But again, just rubbing it seems a little bit non-specific and nonsensical to me. Yeah, and I feel like I'm a massive knock at the soft tissue industry. I'm not, and that like I say, it does have a place. But it's like that whole thing of going, oh, I've heard this is really good for recovery. Well, that needs some context, doesn't it? Recovery in what sense? Recovery and you can perform again the next day, or recovery in terms of you supercompensate and become better. And those two things are very, very distinct, because the one that makes you perform better the next day probably just undoes any benefit you might have had out of the stress. The one that means you get better, you have to take the time and be patient enough to adapt to the stress.
Yeah, no, makes perfect sense. I think you made a good point about the sort of with the Tour de France example, it's a very specific time. It's a very, there was this big thing about ice baths a couple of years ago, like blunting hypertrophy response, and they got really big. But they said, but it might actually be, I think it was Andy Galpin was talking about it, saying, well, maybe if you're in this tournament, a tournament of whatever it is, it could be a really good thing where you're not trying to, like you say, go further. You're only worried about the next game, the next few weeks, the next play. So maybe it is the right thing to put in to help. Whereas, maybe out of season and for just every week, it's probably not the best idea.
Look, then I can tell you, Ed loves massage, Ed loves contrast bathing, and he uses both all the time, and he believes massively in them. And I think one thing you've got to bear in mind as well is a lot of the time we all like to focus on details, either for better or for worse, whether we're promoting them or dismissing them. You still got to think overall they are detailed things. They're not the big hitters. So if you're getting everything else right and you misapply one of those things a little bit, it ain't going to make a difference because you're getting all the big things right. And sometimes the placebo effect of just believing in it is got a greater effect than the actual tool itself in the first place.
Yeah, so just while we're there, we'll catch it. Just the little name drop, Ed. For those who don't know, he's talking about Eddie Hall, world's strongest man. So could you just give us a bit more about how it came to be that you started working with Ed? Because I think that's where I found you, your work with Ed, and how that, I started to, I think I added you on Facebook. Just started watching. It was more the post I read about you. I was like, oh yeah. It just kind of ticked a lot of boxes in my head from things that I might have thought, but obviously, some with a lot more practical experience and degrees in it as well was explaining it better. So could you just give us a bit more info on how it came to be and you work with Ed and what do you do with him?
So I don't know anything with him at the moment. Obviously Ed's off doing this sort of boxing exhibition thing at the moment.
Okay. We'll get more into that later.
Yeah. So my now wife, who I was seeing at the time, competed in strongwoman. I was living in Scotland at the time, and that was when I had a gym, and I had a client base, predominantly rehab clients, and that's what I was doing. But because I was doing this sort of rehab-based stuff, she was training for strongwoman, and she was being coached by Luke Fulbrook, who was Ed's long-term strongman training partner.
Yes, I know that.
So, he had a lot of issues with injury, which is ongoing and a long story and lots of reasons why and whatever else. So Claire made an introduction to Luke to look at Luke and go through some things with him. And in fairness, we had some success for a decent period of time in at least reducing the frequency and the severity of the problems he was having. And off the back of that, I then did some work with Ed. And to be honest, the actual amount of work I did with Ed was, it wasn't massive, but I would like to think it was important because it was kind of filling a little gap just in terms of he was getting a lot of hands-on treatment for basically massage stuff and such like. He was obviously training incredibly hard. But nobody was really looking at, okay, well, there's a bit of a trend in terms of you're really, really good statically. You're really, really good at all the static events and kind of winning them. So you're basically the strongest man in this already, but you can't win a whole competition. Why not? And we kind of looked at sort of movement-related things that might have been reasons why he wasn't getting his static strength to cross over into all of the other events. And really, this is an interesting one in terms of S&C for anyone who's more S&C focused and directly strength sports focused. Strength sports are funny because we do a lot of things where you're in full hip flexion. So I'm talking like deadlifting and squatting. You're in full hip flexion. You take your hips to end range of flexion and you load it there in like the worst possible mechanical position. And that's basically where the action happens. Nobody really misses a squat in the top quarter, which is why you see gym bros putting a massive load of weight on the bar and only doing the top quarter, because you pretty much can't miss it there. So you're kind of missing the point, because like sporting and athletic activities all happen in the top quarter. So there's a term, the universal athletic position, which is basically where your brain will go to the most powerful position, which funnily enough is a quarter squat, which is why you put all the weight on in quarter squat, and you will express force from there. So if you look at the position somebody's hips are in for the dry phase of sprint or for throwing a punch or swinging a bat, pretty much all of these things they go to the same kind of angles of ankle, knee, and hip, and then you have fast, explosive, powerful drive into full triple extension. Well, Ed was really good at anything that involved going through long range of movement and being loaded in full flexion. Anything that involved being in full extension, not so good. So we kind of looked at that, and it really was just a case of actually very minor tweaks, just taking the brakes off. So, you know, you can't take too much credit for that because all the real hard work had already been done. And this is one of the things that I come across a lot with clients. You'll get people going, oh, come and do some magic and take me from being bang average to a world beater. Like, well, it's very easy. If somebody's already got all of the attributes they need to be a world beater, and there's a couple of little tweaks that make a difference, that
1% will add up at that level, right?
Yes, marginal gains at that point makes a difference. But if you're miles off in terms of the big important stuff, you're still miles off in terms of the big important stuff. So it's kind of weird because I'm kind of contradicting my own business and my own message to a degree in terms of, like, details are just like the details, and how important they are. It depends, doesn't it? If it's something that's a detail but is then literally being injured and you can't train, so the detail is getting in the way of the great big picture, then suddenly it becomes important. But only enough that you get it back to being a detail again, so the big important stuff remains the big important stuff, which is your main, you know, bulk of your training. So I suppose it's probably one of the reasons why I haven't got like 2 million followers on Facebook, because, you know, the answer is it depends in context.
That's our favourite saying on this show, it depends, yeah. But I think that's why they always say maybe it takes a bit longer to build that following, but, you know, I think you're very extremely informative and very honest. I think I might have read on a few of your pieces saying that I want to fix you, will help you basically in one session and give you stuff to go away and do, which normally from a business perspective maybe isn't the best idea because you haven't got that recurring revenue. But I think, you know, morally, you know, with your morals, you want to fix people, you want to get them on and help. But I think in turn that's leading to a lot of people maybe hopefully trying to connect to you. Or if we're talking about, you know, overuse injuries or different things here and there, your name keeps popping up. So maybe that's probably why it's a bit of a slow burner, but hopefully that would work better in the long run, I think.
Yeah, I mean, to be honest, I can't complain. Business is good, everything's all really good, and it is a slightly different approach. But I think a lot of that comes down to actually, to an extent, trying not to get into the mentality of actually fixing people and trying to get people more to understand what might explain what's happening to them, so they can manage that themselves on an ongoing basis. I think from a therapy perspective, in terms of this repeat business, it's nice to keep people in the dark and to keep people confused and to keep people not understanding what's going on, so they are dependent. Whereas if you're actually following like a bit more of an education type process and making people feel more empowered, making people feel less fragile, making people feel like they understand what's going on, they're in control and they can manage it, then actually that makes an awful lot of things go away on their own. I can think of a lad I saw this morning, a young guy who had basically got a little bit of a muscle spasm in his low back from landing funny, playing football. And like dead common thing, and it's like it's not a pathology. Nothing is broken. You've got a little bit of like a nervous system response that's protective, because your brain, I suppose in the layman's terms, just panics at the way you fell. So it becomes almost self-fulfilling because you guard it, which feeds this process. So we need to break that and become more confident in more relaxed movement again, so that everything kind of go back to normal. So
relax, my God, fucking relax. Yeah,
yeah, exactly. Yeah, pretty much that. And that's funny because some of the things I've given him to do, going, yeah, this at the moment you can't do this because you've got this little spasm. So I want you to work on doing this thing that you can't do. And actually, to be honest, that's like rehab an awful lot of the time. It's almost like identifying the thing that's problematic, and rather than avoiding it, engaging with it and working on it. So it's frustrating, it's difficult, but it then actually has a meaningful outcome. Whereas just, no, mentality, you're gonna have to rest that. Like, well, yeah. Where does that end?
Well, same place as always, nowhere. It just doesn't work.
Rest that. What? So it gets deconditioned. Yeah, that's going to upload. You've already got this issue potentially down to not being conditioned enough to do the things that you're trying to. So when I talk about conditioned, again, I suppose that needs a little context. a lot of the time in our world, conditioning just means it's a cool, hardcore word for cardiovascular fitness, isn't it? Conditioning, or in bodybuilding terms, it's low body fat conditioned. When I'm talking about conditioned from a therapy perspective, I'm talking about it in terms of in a very general sense, how prepared is your body for the things you're asking it to do? Is it ready for it? Is it conditioned for it? And that could mean quite a few different things. But this is one of the things that came out of going back and doing the masters, and it's one of the biggest things in the industry that is kind of moving forward. Saying that actually I've always focused on biomechanics and going, oh yeah, you've got this injury because you're overloading this, because you've got this compensatory movement and blah blah. And the sort of yin to that yang is there might be a little bit of that involved. But also, if you're actually just doing too much, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter how good your squat technique is. Absolutely. If somebody sticks 50 kilos beyond your 1 rep max on it, and you lift it off, and you do try to squat it, it's going to end badly.
Yeah, absolutely. I found this practically in my own training. My squat and deadlift is quite good, but I think I've talked to you about this before. My lower back, L5S1, my disc is just very nasty and it's very chewed up and lots of annular tears. It's the reason I finished playing rugby. And even if I lift as well as I can, do everything too good, if I go that slightly bit, I think we talked about it, was it maximum recoverable volume we always pop up with from the RP guys? I think if I just go that little bit too far, injury all the time. And it's really frustrating. It's hard to get that around to people as well. And they're like, how the hell did I get injured? It's like, well, you just push that little bit. It's very hard. I mean, you're trying to do as much as you can, or, push it. But obviously you just get that tiny bit too far for some people. I think some people are maybe more sensitive than others, would you say, with pre-existing injuries or problems?
You've also got to look at localized and systemic. So there's different ways you can measure recovery in a systemic sense that can be useful for a lot of athletes. So the heart rate variability concept, where you wear a monitor and it tells you how it's nothing to do with your heart rate in terms of how many beats per minute. It's down to the fine pattern within the sort of heart muscle itself. That becomes more regular when you're stressed. So when you're in the sympathetic nervous system, so when you're ready to perform. And then when you're genuinely relaxed and you're parasympathetic dominant, it becomes less regular. So by monitoring this, which you can do with some heart rate monitors, you can get an idea of how well recovered you are, how much you're recovering. And that as an objective feedback thing can be really useful to our athletes who are motivated, to stop them just beating themselves up and smashing themselves into a hole.
So yeah, I've just got I think it's a Whoop band, which does the heart rate variability, and it's got the strain, so how much cardiovascular strain you're doing every single day, and then the recovery, and it gives you feedback on, right, if you want to recover from what you've done today, you should aim for this amount of sleep and stuff like that. So for me, because I'm a natural bodybuilder, I know when I'm dieting and my body fat gets really low, my ability to recover is impaired. And I think I hit overtraining quite a bit when I was prepping last time. So it's one of the reasons why I've invested in something like that, just so that I can, everyone always thinks more is better. Whereas actually, when you're in that sort of state, more isn't always better. More can lead to things like excessive muscle breakdown, you pick up little niggling injuries, you get sick, all that kind of stuff. So yeah, I 100% agree with what you're saying in terms of that recovery and being able to measure it. But you were about to say that there's another thing in terms of recovery to watch as well.
So for that, and that's exactly what I'm getting at. So you're talking about when you're dieting, and obviously that's starting to affect things. Again, when you're dieting, psychologically, that creates other issues, doesn't it? So the likelihood of overthinking it is massive, and whatever you do, criticizing yourself for making the wrong decision. So am I training too much? Am I training too little? So objective feedback is phenomenal at that point, because it can help stop you pushing yourself to the point you get ill and then look like crap on stage. So it's really useful. But what it can't necessarily tell you is if you've got something localized that you're overloading. So this idea of overloading or overusing something, you've got both systemically and locally. And it's one of the things that it's interesting when people try and do something different. There's a really interesting paradox in terms of being fit and conditioned enough in general to injure yourself doing something specific. So if somebody is a mess, but they're a mess on every level, they've got no muscular endurance, they've got no muscular strength, they've got no cardiovascular fitness, and they decide to take up something new, the likelihood is that they're going to become tired and exhausted before they cause themselves too many huge problems. If you get somebody who is really quite fit in a quite specific sense, like they're a phenomenal road cyclist, and they go on holiday and they can't take the bike and they haven't got access to a bike, so they road run, they could cause themselves a huge problem because they've got no real ability to decelerate their own body weight because that's not been trained on the bike. Yet they've got the muscular endurance, the muscular strength, the cardiovascular capacity to run long enough that they have to slow themselves down so much for the impact as they run, they injure themselves. So it like very specific, like local recovery issues and local stresses can be different to the overall systemic recovery. So it's one of those things, it's a really useful tool, but it isn't the silver bullet that obviously the manufacturers won't tell you is. Because you can't tell you what's happening, each different tissue. You could still, if you were on some kind of, I don't know, bicep specialization program to bring up a weak area before the show, you could be recovering systemically fine and still give yourself like a localized injury from overloading that muscle that there was no warning came up on your weak system.
What do you think?
Yeah.
So you got me thinking there. A lot of high-level athletes in various things. They talk about you mentioned putting the brakes on, like never quite. I think the Russians. I watched a podcast where I think it was Mikhail saying it was like dry humping. You're never quite getting there, but you're stimulating it just enough to feel good. And then when it comes competition day, that's when you let all the brakes off and go for it. I mean, I guess my question would be, what do you think about going sort of, around areas of, we're talking maybe 90% plus of max maybe for strength athletes doing training regularly? And then my next question would be, do you think exercise variation is important to limit, say, maybe overuse injuries, or do you think you can happily squat, bench, deadlift, whatever it is you do for your sport the whole time?
I think how heavy you go and percentages is an interesting concept to around, and I wouldn't say I'm an expert in that area. I think one of the things we have to be very mindful of in our sector is I think the rules, if you like, and what you can get away with and what's realistic is so incredibly different depending whether you're assisted or not. And not always in the ways people think. But I think people should be clear on that. So, like, I'm not saying this makes me a better human being or I'm some sort of choir boy or whatever, but I've never used it, so I've got no experience of it. So I do have to be careful when working with athletes who do use and have used that. I don't have that direct experience of that, and that's something I think you need to respect as well.
Between the athletes that are, openly on or off, is there a big difference in maybe? I always hear some massage therapists say the muscles just feel different, or can they tolerate more or less, or is it more joint things with guys and girls that take stuff? I don't know.
So the muscles do feel different, absolutely feel different, and I couldn't tell you why that is, but yeah, you can tell actually sometimes the same client, you can always tell when they're on or off, because sometimes it's like touching like the wall, and the rest of the time it's like a normal human again. Even if they're roughly the same size. So that is a thing, and that's, I can't show you, point you to any like academic research for this, but that is definitely a thing. But you are at different injury risk, because you go think that the adaptation cycle for muscle is half the adaptation cycle time for tendon, which for most naturals makes no issue whatsoever, because the likelihood of you getting strong enough or getting big enough, or a combination of both, to overcome your tendon strength is almost nil. Whereas if you are using your ability to get strong enough, big enough, quick enough that your tendons don't keep up, it's something we see a lot. You see an awful lot of full ruptures in assisted athletes that you don't see in unassisted athletes.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
so
it makes sense when you say it. Yeah, it just makes sense to me.
Yeah.
But if you think about it, it's just so like your genetic limitations. You're moving those goalposts. Well, how much does the attachment site for a tendon change when you start using. Well, it doesn't really, does it? So the tendon might get stronger and thicker and adapt, but the actual attachment site, as far as I'm aware, doesn't get meaningfully bigger. Well, the muscles get meaningfully bigger. There's a reason that, you know, Ronnie Coleman looks very, very, very different in his peak to the guy who won whatever the tested show was that year that no one cared about because he didn't look like that. So, you know, you've got a very clear issue there, and you do get some different substances that people are using are associated with tendon tears, yeah, and that definitely is a thing. Again, I couldn't put posters to any research on it because no ethics committee passes research on steroid use because it's seen as unethical, which I think is one of the bugbears I've got, because it's something that's happening. It's something that's happening in greater and greater amounts, sort of worldwide. And I think we need that, because the thing that scares me, and this really is what bothers me, we were talking earlier about people appointing themselves as competent at things in our industry. So, it's bad enough you've got people going, oh, I'll help you with an injury based on what? You're level 3 PT, brilliant. It's worse than that. You look at it and go, well, most young guys who are using, who's giving them advice on what to use?
The local meathead that's selling them the drugs that they're taking.
Yeah. Well, what do they want them to do? Buy more drugs. So, I personally,
Taking them on tread on their first cycle and wondering why they're like committing suicide.
Well, I think the issue we've got is if you go to a festival, well, obviously you can't at the moment, but like recently there's been a movement at festivals to test the drugs people are taking with them to see how basically how toxic they are, isn't it? See if it's actually going to give them a problem that it's not meant to be giving them. So it's not saying that if you take, a ridiculous amount of it, it's still not going to cause you a problem. It's saying, is this drug actually safe? So rather than eating the drugs off people, we're testing them to see if they're safe, because we've accepted that we're not going to make the world's drug problem go away. And actually, if you're going to put on a dance festival, of course people are going to go and take drugs. That happens. So we've accepted that's the thing. We're not vilifying people for taking a personal amount, and we're testing to see if it's safe, which, I know that's got some backlash in some circles, but to me that makes perfect sense, because it's going to happen anyway. Let's try.
If you look at all the countries that have decriminalized even like Class A drugs, so the users are not criminals anymore, the cases of drug use have actually gone down, because the people that are addicts can go and get the help that they need. There's less stigma that kind of comes with it. So people will openly talk about the problems that they're having. A drug addict hasn't become a drug addict, whether it's steroids, whether it's heroin, whatever it is, they haven't become addicted to that substance because of the substance itself. They've been driven to that because something else is going on up here. Then just like you were saying with the problems with injuries and stuff, going to the root cause of it, the same thing with substance abuse. You've got to go to the root cause, and the root cause is always trauma. So if you've got somebody who's been mentally traumatized and then you make them a criminal, they are not going to go and get the help that they need to be able to get over that mental trauma, so that they are not then relying on that substance. I think I was listening to a podcast from, I can't remember if it was JP or something like that, and they were saying, I think it's roughly 60 to 70% of like steroid users are addicted to it because of whatever reason. They are never off cycle. They are doing blasting and cruising, so they are never not injecting something. They're never letting their body take over and kind of come back down to a normal level. But why?
We say blasting and cruising because I'm around this obviously a fair amount, and people that we will talk openly about it. But I'm basically off. I'm only using the TRT dose. You hear you hear it all the time, and you go, I'm basically natural and that, okay. And if you scratch surgery, and the weird part is, I don't even know what the number's meant to be or whatever else, but I'll always go like, oh, your GP give you that then? They're like, well, no. And I'm like, all right, so it's not TRT dose then, is it? And then they're like, well, it's not far off. And I'm like, do you know what TRT dose is? And some of them will turn around and go, well, yeah, it's this much. And I'm like, are you taking that much? Like, well, no, I'm taking a bit more. Okay, so this whole thing's just falling apart immediately.
Yeah.
It's a TRT dose is some lie you're telling yourself because you actually are terrified to come off completely. But this brings us around to the whole problem. The whole problem is that because your doctor has taken an oath that says that he do no harm, if you tell him that you're using, I think as I understand it from the doctors that were on my masters, they would say, yeah, you're basically duty bound to say stop doing that. So that means that if you use it and then you don't want to stop doing that, you're not going to talk to your doctor about it because you're not going to get the answer that you want, which means you're going to go and speak to the person who will give you the answer that you want. Oh yeah, of course it's safe. No, of course you don't cause yourself any problems. So I think we need to get around to this situation where we've got people, we take away all that bollocks and go, right, okay, this is going to happen. People are going to do it. So how can we actually take the stigma away? How can we actually have it blood tested, help people do it in a less damaging way, and have people who actually got, 3 A's at A level, went to medical school advising on it, not somebody who, with the best will in the world, isn't going to grasp biochemistry, which is, I think of it almost a lot like gambling. Everyone I know who's ever been a gambler will tell you that they're about even and they don't really lose. Every single one. I'm about even. Really? Okay, so Denise Coates, this is topical because I'm in Stoke-on-Trent. Denise Coates has got a bloody helicopter. What did she pay for that for? She runs Bet365 to keep all you guys even, none of you lose. How the hell did she afford a helicopter? Some of you are lying. In fact, all of you, because it's a fucking algorithm and you lose 30% on average. So you're losing. You are all losing. And it's the same. Every single person I know who uses gear will tell you that they're a light user relative to somebody else, and every single one will tell you that they do it sensibly. They do it sensibly and they're well informed. And it's like, no, I don't believe you because unfortunately I don't even understand what well informed means because there's not enough real scientific evidence to show us to make anyone well informed. Everyone's winging it. We're on a tangent a bit here. We're well away from the injuries and we're outside of my.
Yes, it's good kind of fun to talk about because I think it's one of those things. Like, I think for me, growing up, steroids was definitely a taboo with rugby because you get tested. Like, looking back, I can maybe think of one person that might have taken, but he had very, circumstances when he was out from the sport for a while. But during season, we were tested like all the time. Like, being me a junior athlete, I was at the time, an 18-year-old academy player like a nobody. I think I got tested 3 times in one season. So there just never really was that option to. And then looking at the strength of the guys, pitch, I think you talk about so in your work, pitch strong. And there was some guys who were fucking monsters, but gym wise, didn't press anything, like nothing impressive. Like, I've got 18-year-olds lifting way more than the top guys who were seen as really strong. So I'm back then, I don't think it was a thing at all. But I did notice when I moved up here and started going to, your local gyms, your spit and sawdust gyms, and talking to a few more people, I didn't realize how rife it was. And it's quite a big thing. I mean, I'm still involved a lot in the, quote unquote, the natural strongman and the powerlifting, that kind of stuff. And I know people do, there are some cases of people taking, but quite rare, I think. But I didn't realize it was such a big thing. And so I think, it would be amazing if it could be, instead of your coach supplies you some tests or, make you down the road sorts it out. It'd be great if it could be a bit more, but I don't know how far off we are from that. Maybe never.
I think it's coming. There's more people who are willing, because in this country, again, it's not illegal to use, it's illegal to sell, whereas in America, it's illegal to use. So in America, it's even more tight-lipped. But you've got more of these, like the high-level coaches and the high-level athletes now that are all there, especially in bodybuilding, just because I think in that sport, especially like the untested side of it, it's assumed, basically, if you compete in that sport and you're at a high level, people know that you're on gear. So there's no point even denying it anymore, because it's like you're not going to compete at that level with people that are genetically gifted and taking steroids if you're just genetically gifted.
I think that this is one of the bigger problems, because we've got these guys who are high level and they're actually advising people on biochemistry with no real basis.
And that's just it. Like, where do you kind of draw the line? Because people are just going to go, well, he's big, I'm going to follow the cycle that he does. Rather than actually, there's probably somebody with a doctorate that is advising these guys, right, you are 300 pounds in your off season, you can get away with X, Y, Z. Whereas your 18-year-old down the gym probably isn't going to be needing as higher dosages as somebody who's 300 pounds and eating 300 grams of protein a day. But yeah, I think people have to become more open about it first to then the people with the doctorates and stuff who have got something to lose. Like those athletes haven't got anything to lose. They're in a sport where it's generally accepted. Whereas your GP coming out and right, okay, I'm willing to kind of give advice on steroids. Okay, are they going to get struck off for doing that? Are they going to lose? They've just spent 10 years getting their doctorate to go and then do whatever.
They're not going to do their whole life on, are they? And I think one of the major issues we've got as well is people will use their level of intellect and their level of understanding to justify the behaviour they want to make anyway. So you've got people saying things like, well, it's not dangerous because whatever compound's less toxic than ibuprofen. And you're like, right, but ibuprofen doesn't make you lean at 5'7" and 300 pounds. The issue might not be that the substance itself is particularly toxic or particularly dangerous. The issue may be that effectively you're meant to be, 170 pounds and you're 300, meaning how are your organs going to deal with this metabolically active tissue that needs a blood supply and nutrients all the time? It might not be that you're going to die of anything related directly to that substance. It might be that you're going to die from system overload, multiple organ failure, because you're never meant to be 300 pounds. So effectively you could call this natural causes or whatever on death certificate. The actual reason is still that you're using it to be absolutely fucking enormous. You know what I mean? We need to be careful who we're saying will take advice off on these kinds of things, and that's what I'd like to see happen. I'd like to see it decriminalised. I'd like to see it, in terms of advising on it being decriminalised, I'd like to see it talked about a lot more, because I'd also like to see, and this kind of brings us back round, from like a research perspective, I'd like to see research, including the musculoskeletal side, because we've got all this stuff coming out, people saying, this compound will give you a higher risk of full muscle ruptures and tendon tears, but it is only empirical. There's no real studies going into this. And to be fair, I mean, I could probably actually put something together and do something that was retrospective, asking people in strength sports who've had full ruptures anonymously what they were using. So that actually is maybe possible, and actually maybe something that just talking about it now has occurred to me and think, yeah, it's maybe something you should try and get done. Because it'd be nice, because then if there was some real evidence, you could actually point people to it and go, do you know what? All these people who completely tore this off the bone were using this. Maybe if you want to avoid tearing things completely off the bone, give that a wide berth. I think we kind of need that. We need that across the board. We need a little bit more evidence to work from, and we kind of need to take away the people who are preying on the mystic and the mystery, and have a little bit more real basis.
Cool, man. So I think, I think we all pretty much agreed on that. So I think maybe time to dive into some questions from the group. I think that'd be a good place to go off from there and go into it. Right. So you are the man of all things knowledge, body repair, and get yourself back fit again. So one of the ones that comes up a lot is backs. So from in the group we've got, I'll just read it out for you, Chris. So you've got, my lower back can give me jip, but strangely enough, it is only in normal everyday movements involving rotation. It isn't painful when doing movements like deadlifts or squats in the gym. What can I do to add rotation into my sessions to hopefully strengthen whatever is weak? Currently, I don't do anything for rotation. Any other advice is appreciated.
So there's a couple of interesting things on that. So if you look at something that, and again, this is all surmising because I'm not looking at this person, but one of the things that tends to give people sort of low back pain is anything related to quadratus lumborum. So you're looking at a little muscle that's deep, that runs either side of the spine, that basically controls flexing the spine to one side or the other. So like side bends. So this muscle, if both fire at once, you go into, it assists with full extension of lower back. So if you squat on your deadlift and you do that in full extension, which a lot of people do, the old school fully hyperextended and then squat and deadlift in that position, you will effectively be in a comfortable position for that muscle in a shortened range, if that is a problem for you. When you go into rotation, one side of it has to lengthen as you rotate. So that would suggest to me that might be why. So if you've got somebody who's got the classic sort of ape man look of hyperextended lower back, anterior pelvic tilt, that is why they might not have an issue when they're doing things where the hips are actually flexed, like squatting and deadlifting, and when they're fully extended and they go to rotate, it gives them an issue. It might be related again to hip extension as well, being that if you aren't very good at top end full hip extension, and you walk in a position where you actually don't get full hip extension, that 8-man position, you create a lever that shouldn't be there relative to gravity, i.e. you're not stood up straight. Because you're not stood up straight, you've got more load on that muscle, and when you rotate, that'll be worse. So that would be my thought process. That's what most likely. So a couple of things. One thing that I would do, and again, it's the mentality change. It doesn't have to be heavy, but I would do some lunging, and I would do some lunging as almost like a therapeutic stretch type thing, like walking lunging, trying to stay upright, gradually trying to stay more and more upright. I'd bet my ass that this person won't do much lunging, and if they try, will fall forwards. So if they work on
motion going on, I see it all the time. Yeah.
They work on gradually being able to lunge more upright, they'll have some of these problems just go away. And the other one that, I mean, I put this out there all the time, but again, it doesn't have to be massively heavy, but you can get heavy at it, is like windmills, because if you do windmills, you have to shift your pelvis to one side. You load QL in quite a sort of therapeutic way, but the problem is it's such a sort of intimidating movement and technically difficult movement with somebody who already has this problem. I'd advise them to jump straight into it. They might want to start with very little load or even no load at all. But yeah, I would be saying try some walking lunges, try some windmills, and you might be surprised. I wouldn't expect you to be good at either of those movements, and that would potentially explain why this happens.
Yeah. It's got me thinking along the lines of people that have problems more along one side of the back than the others. You mentioned the QL. I know sometimes it's noticed that one QL is a spasm, you kind of twist it off to the side. It seems quite a similar thing. Even in bilateral movements, so sometimes they always twist a little bit. Would you recommend the same sort of things, or do you think we're working more, I don't know, like hip aeroplanes or something?
So ideally, there's a little bit of assessment required, because one of a few different things can happen. Like if you've got a difference in like ankle dorsiflexion range, or even more of like a neural issue in terms of how much your brain wants to load through that range. So it might be there just kind of at a low level, but once you put a load on, one knee doesn't travel as far forward as the other. That causes you to twist, obviously. The other one is any kind of hip injury, even you might be unaware of, or any kind of groin weakness, adductor weakness, will lead to somebody sitting onto that leg, that side, because if you say your right adductor is weak relative to your left, you will sit generally when you squat towards your right side, because that deloads the adductor. Mm-hmm. So you load the left adductor more, you put more load through that and less on the right, and you're stronger in that position to stand back up. But again, sometimes that's not a problem. Everything doesn't have to be 100% perfectly symmetrical, but it's probably a bell curve. If you do that more and more and more and more, you're asking for other problems that, like you say, you might then get a QL issue and a grizzly lower back. I think all around you've got a bit of an issue with the powerlifting side of things, that you really are going down a rabbit hole of quite unnatural movements, in a sense, in terms of very, very heavily loaded, slowly in full flexion bilaterally, that don't really exist outside of powerlifting.
So you're saying it's not natural to lie down on your back and push your weight up? I mean, come on.
Mm-hmm. Well, the one that always makes people upset is people are like, there's nothing more natural than squatting. I'm like, you need a rack. So actually, the fact that weight's all the way up there and on your back, and you can't get it there without a rack, or if you're a real special, a bloody monolift, because you can't even walk it out. As much as it's physically impressive, it's not really normal. Mm-hmm. So, I think that's what we're going to get around to, that you're purposely going down a route of overloading something for the sake of it beyond the point that it's particularly useful. And that is why it's a sport. And that's why if you're using them for like strength and conditioning purposes, you might modify them, or basically, like you're saying, being the best powerlifter doesn't make the best rugby player, because you get to a point where getting better at squatting for the sake of squatting is sport specific to powerlifting and the squat. It isn't for best transference into other things, because the time invested of getting better at that particular movement would be better spent for that rugby player playing rugby, or doing some change of direction work, or single leg work, or the other things that help that crossover. So you just got to try and get a bit of an idea of context with it.
Yeah, no, all fantastic stuff. I'll go next question from Ben Ingerson. He says, why do my knees sound like a bowl of Rice Krispies when I squat? Hashtag snap, crackle, pop.
Crepitus, yes, so normally not something to worry about. You can quite often get that to reduce with just like, and again, it gets a bad rap, but probably for no real reason. Just warming up loads and getting things moving nicely before you load it too much might make the noise reduce somewhat, a little bit less muscle tension. Some dynamic stretching and stuff might make it. It might not, and to be honest, it's pretty normal. I do it all the time. Don't worry about it unless it's associated with anything else. Generally, crepitus isn't considered to be a pathology or a problem, so don't worry.
I mean, speaking of warming up, like how specific does your warm-ups need to be? Are people taking warming up too far? Are people not warming up enough? Is getting under the bar fine, or is it very, very individualized?
Yeah, see, I think I've been down a rabbit hole a bit with that. You can do a lot with that. You can, yeah, I suppose it depends. I think if you're generally well stacked up, you don't have to worry about it that much. But I think the problem is by the time people start worrying about it, it's normally because they're very much aware and they're correct that they're not very well stacked up, i.e. they're not very well balanced. And I think there's some interesting research, and this is brilliant really, that shows that training through a range of motion probably helps you retain that range of motion as well as stretching through it. And training through it makes you strong through it, makes you resilient through it in a way that stretching doesn't. And activating a muscle at its end range makes it activate quicker there. And stretching it to it without activation makes it activate slower there. So you're more stable and you're going to be more injury resistant there. So in theory, bodybuilding, which covers like done well, a wide variety of different movements, it is potentially like more beneficial musculoskeletally than powerlifting because you've got much more variety, and that variety is potentially helpful for retaining all those different ranges of movement. The problem you get with bodybuilding is that to get the most stress on the muscle that you want to show off on stage, you whether you realize it or not, you're doing a lot of things to reduce limiting factors, like using a plate-loaded hammer strength machine that fixes your body so you don't need any balance or any core stability. It'll fix your shoulder blades to a great extent so you don't need to stabilize them. So you can just load on as much load as possible for the prime mover. So you develop the prime movers massively out of whack with anything that actually should be the synergists, which creates other issues. So in terms of variety, you don't just need the variety of movement, you probably also need the variety of like energy systems used, the amount of loads used, the duration you train for, they're all actually kind of part of it. So like I am really off on a tangent here, but if you think about like upper body stuff, you could argue that a dumbbell bench press and a parallel bar dip might be like the most amazing combination you could do because they oppose each other. Because although you're largely kind of pressing out in front of you, when you do a lying dumbbell chest press, the bench to a great extent fixes your shoulder blades in place, but the other end of the chain, your hands, are free to move about. So it kind of de-stresses things from that end. When you do dips, your hands are fixed, so they can't move, but your shoulder blades can move and your shoulder joints can move. It's free from the other end of the chain, so they complement each other. And the open and closed chain nature probably is good for overall shoulder health. Bench press is a bit of a nightmare because the bar fixes your hands in relation to each other, and the bench fixes your shoulder blades. So if your shoulders aren't in particularly good health to start with in terms of available range of motion and stability through that range of motion, it hammers you because there's nowhere to hide. So you can't, the little sort of asymmetries you've got and the little range of motion that are weak, you can't work around them. So it can be quite interesting sort of diagnostically in a sense, but it is a big ask, and this is why so many people have so many problems with bench press, because it does leave you with nowhere to hide. And in addition to that, you're loading up very, very heavy in a plane that you could never load heavy without the bench. So it kind of probably isn't that natural anyway.
Yeah, it's definitely not there. There's been a big rise in the fat pads. I've started using a fatter pad. I know Donnie Thompson talks about it a lot of the time. Sort of, so you've just got more of a base to fix yourself on and a big, thicker pad. And it does help. But yeah, you're so right. I mean, I'm a PT myself as well. And so many people I just don't have bench press because they're like, what's the point? It's just, unless you're a powerlifter and you don't need to. And if you're like, you talked about this as well, Deej, like you quite like benching, but for some clients, it doesn't even they don't even feel the pecs working. So it's like, well, what's the point? They won't change it.
Yeah, exactly. And I liked what you said there about the variety, not just in the exercises, but the energy systems, the rep ranges, whether you're using dumbbells, machines, or barbells. Like, I find that a lot of people get very emotionally attached to certain exercises, and they just keep doing them, whether it's bodybuilding, whether it's powerlifting, kind of whatever it is. They always revert back to those things because they do those things well. Whereas actually what they could probably use is spending some time on those exercises that they're not so good at and improving on them. Because like you said, when you do an exercise you're not good at, there's a reason why you're not good at it. It might not be the prime movers. It might be some of those synergists. It might be some of the antagonists. It might be something completely different. It might just be that you've not done that exercise enough for your nervous system to be able to do it well enough. But people are just attracted to the muscles that they can see and the ones that so I know loads of people that overhead shoulder press, even though they know for 3 days after doing that, their shoulders are going to be killing them. But it's because they like to have the big cat shoulders. And it's like, but why don't you just find a different exercise that doesn't do that? Why don't you high incline press or do something that's just not going to aggravate it? But again, they're just emotionally attached to it.
That's interesting because that's so much the yin to the yang with bodybuilding. That one of the real pluses that there's no like statutory lift you must do means you can work around stuff, which is great. And then you've got the argument of short term versus long term. Short term, work around it, keep training, work around it, stop hurting yourself. Long term, also do have pay some attention to, everyone else can do that and I can't. I wonder if there's something underlying that I might have to have addressed in case it just keeps getting worse and bites me in the ass longer term. Because I have got quite a lot of bodybuilding clients who are like 40 plus and are ex-competitive bodybuilders and are trying now to address things that they ignored for years and years and years and did eventually bite them in the ass. So I think there's kind of two sides to that, but you're absolutely right. Like you hear PT say all the time, my clients squat. I'm like, that makes you an awesome moron because like your client comes in with a set of goals. And your job is to either say to them, do you know what, I'm not really the right person to help you with those. I'm not a specialist in the area. Or if you feel you can help them with them, to help them with those goals. For you to just be imposing on them your weird religious belief in one exercise, it's like, you're a freak. Stop doing it now. That's not okay. That's not anything to do with them and their outcomes. But again, what level of training have we got for people coming into the industry to instruct others?
I've got the opposite now. I've now got clients telling me I only want to do that, and I'm like, well, maybe you should do something. No, I just want to squat and deadlift. I'm like, it's quite a different problem now that everyone wants to do that. I'm like, no, maybe we should. No, not just doing that. I'm like, okay.
You're paying me. Sometimes there's an expression that my business coach uses where it's you sell them what they want and then you just do what they need without them knowing it. So it's like, yes, okay, you're going to squat, but we're going to use the safety bar or we're going to use the cambered bar or we're going to do something to work around it.
Well, like warm-ups and cool-downs are like the greatest place ever. It's just like hide the shit they don't want to do. But you can also, again, do it in different energy systems and do it without the overall load on the bar being their only focus. It's like, yeah, you're just going to finish off your warm-up with these walking lunges because, whoever does these, make it up, who cares? I saw Ed doing some video, we're doing it now. Get them doing it. And they're there. And they don't need to be heavy. They're just to get them actually getting into hip extension for a change. Yeah,
I definitely didn't try doing a Turkish get up once you put that video of Ed doing it, and I didn't do that the next day.
It didn't go well. You're still alive, so it didn't go that bad.
Yeah, I was actually right. It's one of those things. I never do it. I just never have done it. But seeing, you can't help it. You see the world's strongest man doing that and, smashing it, obviously. I got up. It wasn't the prettiest thing in the world. I was like, oh, okay, now I can maybe see the merit in some of this kind of stuff. But it was just a good example there of do something you would never normally do, but you've just seen someone who, you really respect do it. And you're like, all right, I'll give it a go then. Yeah, it's a good way of convincing people.
And I posted that. He's never trained that. He's never
I remember you saying never done it before. Just pick. I think it was like a 40, 50 kilo or something like that. Just
yeah. And he did that thing that like only I can do as well, where he got to the top and then just like in pure excitement, and just launched it at the ground as if like I'm done with you now. And obviously, because it's like 48 kilos and so small and so dense, when it hit the ground, it left like this little crater in the ground that like smelled like it had been on fire. Because there's obviously so much energy from throwing 48 kilos down from like 7 foot high. Yeah, it burned the carpet with the energy.
Yeah. I'd still love to visit the strength asylum. It just looks, is that where it was where you did it with them?
Yeah.
Just looks, it's almost like a mecca now for strength athletes, I think. I'd love to go have a visit at some point.
When COVID's over, mate, we'll sort out a road trip.
Yeah, definitely. So up for it, yeah.
So, next question from Wayne Mosley. I have poor mobility in my upper back. A few years ago, I used a small, hard rubber peanut roller, which was great for freeing the joints of my back. But then I dislocated a rib while using it. A bit painful, had a physio sort it. Happened a couple more times, so stopped using it, and now my upper back is back to being immobile. I've tried a few other bigger rollers and different exercises, but nothing beats the peanut roller. Any information on how I can free it up would be great. Thanks.
Wow, I've not heard that one before. Jeez.
Peanut roller thing, it sounds like you're getting a similar effect to almost like being cracked, like the chiropractic or osteopathic thing, where you get sufficient pressure on the joint capsule, like between the vertebrae, that you get like a really significant change. Now that really significant change is incredibly temporary, incredibly so, because it's a neural trick basically. You create such a change in the joint space that the crack comes from the liquid turning to gas, because you increase the joint space so fast that's what happens. So you get that crack. And what it actually does is nothing particularly groundbreaking mechanically. It makes your brain like almost like a reset thing, and stuff around it or the stuff affected by it will kind of relax temporarily, which is why you feel so free directly afterwards. But you're not changing anything fundamentally. So a day later, unless you do it again, it's kind of gone, which is why I still quite like some of that occasionally in warm-ups if it makes you feel better before your session, because then your session's better and that's what you want. But fundamentally, if you want a real significant change, you need to work through and sort of strengthen the ranges that you want. So in terms of like upper back stuff, you are looking at like rotation type stuff. You're looking at things like, I quite like, when I say strengthening, it doesn't have to be massively heavy, but like old school pullovers. So you're loading into full overall like shoulder elevation. So your scapula have got to turn up and upwardly rotate. You get right up into an overhead position. But unlike if you were to say hang from a bar, where you are in a full overhead position, but the load isn't like crossways. When you're doing a pullover, you're in that position, but you now you've created this massively long lever relative to gravity. So you get like a real strengthening effect towards the end range. Weirdly enough, actually things like, and we're back to the bodybuilding thing, doing things like flies, but flies with a light enough weight that you can really stretch into it and open up. Some form of rotational movement, loaded, which again, there's a few different sort of variations you could use. You could use something like cable rotations, but all of these things, what you've got to remember, and this is where bodybuilding starts to fall down for range of movement, because these are long lever things, a small amount of increase in weight actually makes a huge difference. So it's a real temptation to just shorten the lever, i.e. bend your arms. And when you shorten the lever and bend your arms, or you reduce the range of motion in terms of rotation, you immediately start defeating the point. So it takes quite a lot of discipline. So when you say you're going to strengthen these end ranges, you don't need much load to do that, because you're actually just not used to being there in the first place. So again, they can be quite nice, like warm-up movements. Do like 10 straight arm pullovers just with a really, really light load lying on a bench and really open up like your rib cage doing that. Do 10 really, really deep opening up pec flies, again, with really, really light loads, because you want to have really opening up and getting into end range and working into it. And stuff like that might help a lot. Again, I like windmills because there's thoracic rotation involved, but you're also getting like full body hinge with that rotation. So yeah, there's a few options, but I think the main thing to think about is that when you're doing like pressure work, like using the peanut or using a roller, you basically, it's a neural trick. You're tricking your brain into relaxing something temporarily, but the maximum period of time you're going to get any effect from that for is like 72 hours, and it might be as little as a few seconds. You get a very short window, and if you do nothing with it, it was kind of a waste of time anyway.
Makes a great YouTube compilation video, though.
Yeah.
Yeah, but no, it's, yeah, absolutely, Telly. Yeah, it's spot on everything. So Steve Coates says, I have the mobility of a Lego man.
It's not really a question, is it?
Okay, cool. Great question. Moving on. So Anne says, what are the best places, pages, books that give great advice on pinpointing the actual issue and resolving it? I.e., if my knee hurts, where should I start to look for the issue?
Don't know. Yeah, don't know.
Just message Chris and then get chatting.
That is just one, because I think the problem we've got is like supple leopard got massively popular, didn't it? But like there isn't actually a single reference in the entire book.
Is that not?
No, I don't think so. I think it's basically an opinion piece, and some of the stuff in there is definitely now very much outdated in terms of how it was proposed. It was working, what mechanism it will be working by. So we're pretty sure isn't the case. So difficult, but I know a lot of people got a lot from it as well. So, you know, if people are getting something from it and they're feeling it's positive, I don't know. I think if you've got something that you're really worried about, sort of self-assessment and self-diagnosis is probably not that advisable.
I think we're probably talking like, you know, I've got a bit of, like this comes up, I mean, we'll talk about it now if you don't mind, it comes up every week. My inside of my elbow really, really hurts, more often from guys than girls doing tons and tons of curls.
Rotation shit, normally. So basically, that's one of those where you create valgus force. Is it valgus force or varus force? Basically twisting force through the elbow because your shoulders aren't rotating enough, or your supination's off. So again, that you are bob on that. That's quite often a deferred problem. So a lot of people will get that from doing like straight bar overhand pull-ups when they haven't got good external rotation through the shoulders. So there is stuff you can look at for that. And I've put a couple of things out there, and a couple of them were on T Nation, where like self-assessment things that are quite simple, like clock face lunges, lunging to all points of a clock face as if you're stood in the middle. You lunge out with both legs to each one and you just go, right, which can't I do for the next phase of my training? That's going in my warm-up until I can do it, then retest again for your next phase. And it's like really easy, like exactly what you guys both touched about, and it's the Louis Simmons talks about it. Just find the thing you can't do, get better at it, and you'll see like magical things happen randomly off the back of it. There's some of it I've done for upright well, yeah, but there's stuff like where you separate out going, okay, so let's look at scapular movement, let's look at doing scapular press ups, look at scapular rows, overhead shrugs, and then like weird like dip shrugs and scapular pull-ups, and go, right, are any of these really awkward and possibly hard for me to do? Yeah, keep them in your warm-up for the next phase and see if they get better, and see if other things, funnily enough, get better off the back of it. And there's
the amount of people I've tried to teach like a scapular pull-up to, and they just cannot retract their shoulder blades. So I'd have to revert it right back to just band pull aparts so that they can feel what scapular retraction feels like, to then get them up onto a bar and go, right, we're trying to thingy that feeling now pull your scapulars down without bending your elbows. And it's just one of those things. I think a lot of people haven't taken the time to fully feel movements. You go into the gym all the time and you can see people just throwing weights around without really knowing and having the proprioception to go, okay, well, what are you trying to work there? Oh, I feel it in my chest. Okay, well, to feel, so for example, let's go for a chest press. So for me, with a chest press, if I'm using dumbbells with a client, I'll often get them to rotate their fingers like that, so they're at 45 degrees, just because then it better kind of follows the line of the pectoral muscle, and 9 times out of 10 you're going to feel that in the chest. Whereas you see a lot of people chest pressing with their elbows like up here, and then they're wondering why they're kind of getting shoulder pain. But it's like, okay, well, where are you wanting to feel that?
This is great, because this is where you two are a great compliment. It's really interesting, and it's internal and external cueing, and it's going, right, okay, well, you're a bodybuilder, so an awful lot of internal cueing, and it's not performance based. It's about the specific muscle. Powerlifting, a lot of external cueing, just shift the bar, don't worry about how it happens, it just needs to happen. And it's very much like we talked about in any systems thing before. You can deconstruct movements so that you identify where the weak link is and address the weak link. But at some point, you maybe want to put that back into an integrated movement. And when it's an integrated movement, it might be that you want the external cue of just get the weight to shift, or do something athletic like sprint, run, jump, throw, where things all have to work together. But if all you ever do is that, which is where I got to with like a load of the kettlebell stuff, I got dead into that, and all I was doing is these big integrated movements, and all of a sudden you try and go back to doing things where you try and see how things work in isolation, and you can't do it, or you've suddenly found you've created these other issues, and it's just a different way of being imbalanced. And exactly like you said, like you want to try and work on that balance. So some of the time, rather than getting zealous about, well, I train bodybuilding, it's all about feeling that muscle and time and tension, and well, I train strength, it doesn't matter, it's just new from A to B. Actually, a little bit of both sometimes, or doing them in different ways. And it doesn't all have to be in the gym, does it? Some of it might be actual outside, like performance sport. But then you've got the other issue if you have to ease into all those things, because otherwise you're taking now big strong muscles that aren't conditioned to like eccentric loading, you eccentric load them and they tear.
Oh, you hear all the time, big strong guys will go out, do one sprint and tear a hamstring, like, because they're just not ready for it, right?
Yeah. Because they don't want to ease into it. But you know, it is really interesting, because it's like thinking about climbing. You know, it freaks me out. We had a guy like this transfer, just absolutely insane, just literally like breaking everything down, so it had to be 100% perfectly symmetrical, and like technique was such a massive thing about it. Technique must be perfect. I'm sort of thinking, you're off your fucking head. Have you ever seen anyone climb a climbing wall? You know, so the actual outcome of being able to do some form of pull down type pattern is climbing pattern. So you're trying to take pull-ups perfectly symmetrically and get really freaked out if they're not. If you've ever seen anyone actually climb, the climbing and the variety involved in all these different positions might be how you end up with the symmetry in the first place, rather than just trying to hammer symmetry. So maybe just use all different hand positions, mix them up. Sometimes do one underhand, one overhand. Do like, if you're doing 5 sets, do them all in different hand positions maybe. I don't know, but you know, we've got to at least kind of be thinking about and considering these things, because if you only condition one very fixed plane of movement, one very fixed technique, what happens if you slide out slightly of that technique? Well, yeah, you probably will get hurt, because you're just not conditioned to be there. So I quite like the sort of concept of like consistent variety, or variety within classifications, which in a way probably isn't a million miles off Westside, off Conjugate, where you categorize groups of exercises together that are the same general broad pattern, but you change them up so that there's some variety. I would be arguing that the reason for doing that wouldn't necessarily be that that's the best way to improve your 3 power lifts, because for beginners, you're certainly going to need some time drilling consistency and on your main lifts. You've got the neuromuscular confusion argument and all the rest of it. But I actually think for the layman, that kind of consistent variety might be really useful, rather than just improving one very, very specific pattern.
Yeah, I definitely noticed. I was followed, got into Matt Wenning's stuff quite a lot, and with that, he's sort of conjugate based as well. I did notice with changing the exercises almost week to week, not necessarily on the main lifts, but on the assistant stuff week to week. I just felt good. It just felt you were taxing a different kind of slight joint range of motion. Well, I'm talking week to week here. Literally every single week's a different thing. I mean, I've got training ADHD for myself when I train, so I loved it. It was really cool to just constantly change all the time. I just felt better for it, and it's something I've kind of continued on recently. Actually, just keep changing things all the time. So yeah, I think
that's a nice concept, isn't it? You keep your big 3 in for consistency, because you know you might be changing a set of rep schemes or whatever else, but you keep them consistently because they sport specific lift. But then make your assistants work. Yeah, continuous variety. Find the ones that you shit at, get a bit better at them, and then retest. Find the other ones you shit at, get a bit better at them. And you're almost actually, like I said earlier, you're kind of making your assistants work a bit more like the bodybuilding concept that I know a lot of bodybuilders follow, of a lot of variety. And I think that variety is good, yeah, variation.
Absolutely. So next one from Graham Walsh. I have a bulging disc at L5 and struggle to do lying leg raises due to the pressure it puts on my back. Are there any recommended adaptations I can do or alternatives that are safer?
Okay, that's a big question. Firstly, you've got to look at when that was diagnosed and how that was diagnosed, because we do know that the vast majority of sort of disc bulges will reabsorb within 3 months. So a lot of the time people get attached to a diagnosis that may no longer actually be the case, and the symptoms they're getting might not be for the reasons they think they're getting them. I would ask the question for this gentleman what the purpose of the lying leg raises are before trying to look at what else we're doing. I do think it's important to have some full body flexion in your program somewhere, because it's quite neglected relative to full body extension, and again that leads to big, massive, obvious imbalances that cause all sorts of other issues. But that is kind of interesting, because normally when you get into the end range of a lying leg raise, the sort of failure, if you like, is that your hip flexors pull through onto your spine and kind of hyperextend your lower back, which actually puts you in a position that tends not to be too problematic for discs. It tends to be the other way that's problematic, loaded flexion. So, yeah, I'm not entirely sure why that's causing a problem, how long ago that was diagnosed. That's quite a specific question about pathology. So it's probably not best to give general advice. That needs a bit more.
Graham, contact Chris.
Yeah,
interesting.
I've noticed with people who I'd love to hear your thoughts on this, Chris. A lot of people I work with who are if you look at classic duck back, very lordotic, that classic extension. I've noticed nearly I'd almost say 100% of the time, if we just throw in a few leg extensions lying like that, every one of them pays straight away, to the point that I don't do it with those kind of people anymore now. So interesting, just you talking about that with the hip, maybe something to do with the hip flexors or whatnot, like bring it more extension when they go into it.
That would potentially mean that, yeah, that you're more likely to have a facet joint problem in that instance than a disc problem. And again, the facet joint problem could cause similar symptoms, but yeah, it's unlikely that in that position it will cause the disc to bulge and press cases. It's not impossible, of course, but it's that seems a bit inconsistent. Actually, that full hyperextension position is often given the traditional Mackenzie press up position for addressing disc bulges.
Yeah.
So yeah, a bit of an odd one.
Yeah, interesting, because I remember I was given Mackenzie push-ups with my back, and they were like, it's going to fix it. It made it 10 times worse. It was awful, to the point that it was horrific. And that's when I started going down the road, learning about Stu McGill and, Lieberson and those kind of guys, and sort of getting to understanding backs a bit more. I think you're touching on it there when you say it might not be this back bulge you're talking about, it'd be something else, but, we still want to obviously fix it. It's probably not the issue that you think it is, but it doesn't mean we still can't fix it or work on that area.
It kind of brings us back around to, we know from scans that an awful lot of things show on scans that then aren't actually the thing that's symptomatic. And like the old this is now quite famous, this 20% of people at 20 years old, 30% of people at 30 years old, and 40% of people at 40 years old roughly will show disc degeneration or spinal degeneration on a scan that is asymptomatic. So we're trying not to scan people and trying to do more clinical assessment to diagnose things, because actually the movements or the activities that are causing the issue are probably more relevant than a scan taken statically and trying to attach the problem to what you're seeing on the scan. So sometimes you need both to get the full picture, but certainly, and this isn't my opinion, this is what's been shown in it's kind of one of the agendas in like BJSM, the British Journal of Sports Medicine, that put a lot of stuff out, like consensus type stuff, saying fewer scans, less reliant on scans. And again, like I say, a lot of people will say things. You say to people, and be like, "Oh, I've got disc bulge." When was it diagnosed 2 years ago? And you're like, everything's snapshot in time. That what was over 2 years ago may inform us in terms of background as to what's happening now. But in terms of attaching, that's a very simplistic mechanical way of viewing things. That once you've had that is that. Your body's healing, your body's changing, things are happening all the time. So yeah, that needs a little bit more looking at that one.
Yeah, you've echoed a lot of things that have been said to me in the past. I need that scan and that scan. I think my physio rugby was really like, look, basically repeat exactly what you said, and you know, it's so true. Like it really is. Yeah, I mean, even if you did find this, all right, is this does this change things immediately? There's no, you know, back surgery's got you'll probably know, like a huge failure rate, to the point that it's almost like, is it even worth it for a lot of people for what they think it's going to do for them?
There's cultural issues, and that we still seem to think getting cut open is like this kind of gold standard. And I think that changes generation. I think you have to go through the generations where it was quite new and look at this magic that we can do, and isn't it absolutely fucking amazing? And that gets a lot of biting. And then you have to go through a few generations of actually people have had it and it hasn't long-term helped the way they thought it would, for us to start to question it, and then for everyone's sort of attitudes to evolve. It takes time, and it does take generations. I think one of the things you've got to bear in mind, I say to people all the time, is surgery must be an absolute last resort for everything, because it's a trauma. You know, cutting you open and stitching you back up and hacking away at stuff, it is a trauma in itself. So you're taking a problem, you're adding a trauma and a healing period to it. So you have to rehabilitate from the surgery itself. So if it's avoidable, that's the ideal.
Yeah, absolutely. I think last question now from Henry Ramage. On Thursday, I got a trapped nerve in my neck. I can't really move my neck without any pain. Got complete numbness in my right arm and about 60% strength. How can I best recover from this and/or stop from happening again? Obviously, not always guaranteed, but are there ways to help? Thank you. English isn't great in that one.
Yeah. Sorry, Harry. Harry's one of my guys. I wanted him to ask you this, but basically, he's. All of a sudden, I think it's an old rugby injury he had, where almost overnight, I think it has been diagnosed from this physio. I think it is, you got trapped nerve in the neck. He's seen a professional about it. And it's just like that strength has gone straight away. He says he's got a lot of numbness down his arm. He's on some painkillers at the moment. But I was hoping if you had any insight, or is anything you limit the time he's out and start progressing again. Because he was on a roll. He was doing really well with training, and then something out of the blue, it's kind of just stopped. I know we say out of the blue, something must have been going on there to cause this to happen, I presume, but it'd be great if you had any insight to hopefully get him back lifting again.
Yeah, well, again, I think individual cases, just like from an ethical point of view, probably like something there that does sound very much like pathology. It's got quite significant symptoms. Got to be a bit careful how much you comment on that. What I would say is that it's the same again. What you'd be looking to do clinically is try and establish whether they are nerve roots, so from the spine that's causing the issue, or whether it's further down, because you can get, nerve symptoms from muscular problems affecting the nerve part way down its pathway, or you can get it from the nerve root itself. And the first thing to do is kind of establish that, because once you've established that, that can lead what you do in terms of treatment and rehab. And if it is a nerve root issue, if it's a nerve root issue and it's established, and there are ways clinically to establish that it's the movement there that's causing you some of the issues in certain positions, you can have quite a lot of success with McKenzie positions and with putting yourself in a position that encourages the fluid away from the nerve root. That can be helpful. But again, that tends to be quite a short-term thing, because if you carry on trying to do that for a long period of time, that can cause some other problems. So, yeah, the McKenzie stuff can be useful, but you would want a diagnosis first. And from there, you kind of got to see what happens with the symptoms subsiding. I've seen some very, very high level people that have had like atrophy in the upper limb from nerve problems. I'm talking like world level strongmen and bodybuilders who've had this. So it is quite common, and it's really unpredictable. So the bad news with it is quite unpredictable. You can kind of create an environment or work on creating an environment where things should be able to work better, faster, but it isn't that predictable when that will happen, because it's not like when you get a muscle tear and you can kind of hang your hat on, right, it takes this many weeks for the actual muscle to repair. It's a problem with like the signaling, so it can be more difficult. One of the things that's certainly worth looking at is once you've got the initial symptoms under control, I do quite like for nerve problems using you come across tendon machines, complex machines, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
So electrotherapy. You're saying?
You've got access to one.
Okay, so one of the things with electrotherapy is there's like almost zero evidence it does any of the things that it's claimed to do. You can still pay a fortune for physio, which is absolute bollocks. You turn it up, they stick it on you, they leave the room, you charge you money for it. It's almost definitely doing nothing for like tendinopathies or anything like that. But one of the applications that I think certainly is useful is if you've had a nerve problem that has affected recruitment, stimulating the nerve from the other end for a period certainly seems to help you sort of close that loop and get that strength to come back quite quickly. Again, that is mainly empirical, but initially you've just got to get the symptoms under control, which quite often Mackenzie stuff for the neck. But like I say, you need to be guided by your medical team on that in an individual case.
He's got a great team around him. We're just, I think what we picked up from there is, I've got a complex machine. So if he can even just do that and it gets him back a week quicker, that'd be fantastic. So I think when we do these podcasts and speak to everyone, you're just trying to get little nuggets of information all the time. But yeah, hopefully that's a good bit of advice on the nerve. It kind of makes sense, hey, like stimulating the nerve with a bit of electricity.
Yeah, once the initial symptoms are under control and you're just trying to get the any negative effects after that back in terms of like motor control or strength.
We get the motor control back and then the strength. Yeah, makes sense. Cool.
Awesome.
I feel like I've dodged all the questions. I feel like I'm just going, yeah, I can't comment on that. Yeah, I'm not commenting on that.
We always get the people that know. I think the people that really, have been around a long time and know what they're talking about always answer everything. Says, well, let me think of it this way. It depends. Okay, well, I'll have to think a bit more of that. Can you give a bit more information? Because that's the way you answer this. I think hopefully with the audience, we're building and everyone's learning. When you're asking the questions, I think they've probably hopefully got a good bit of understanding themselves. So they'll accept even if you're not answering it as exactly. They're looking for little bits they can take from it. So hypotheticals are fantastic as well, because there's always little.
I say this in presenting workshops, like this what I'm presenting at the moment is my current understanding, my current interpretation based on what I've been exposed to so far, and it can and should evolve and change over time. And that doesn't mean everything I've said now is blanket wrong, much as it doesn't say everything I say in the future is blanket right. It doesn't really work like that. Be very, very fearful of the man who speaks in absolutes. I think one of the things that scares me most is when you get people who are allegedly quite well respected speaking in absolutes, and even worse, when they do something that should be good, like they change their mind, but they change their mind absolutely, and they turn around and say, what I said then was absolutely wrong, and this is now absolutely right. Because we're in a situation, it's like, well, you've learned nothing then, have you? Because you were so sure then, how are you still so sure now? Yeah. And you see it at quite a high level still. It's scary.
Yeah, all the time. I honestly think sometimes these professionals are doing it purposely, knowing that. I think they're doing it because they want to be that authoritarian. And I think, I can't pronounce it.
With social media, it creates more of an argumentative thing of this is right, this is wrong. Whereas the people that walk down the middle and go, yeah, sometimes this will work and sometimes this will work, that's not going to be the sort of thing that goes viral, is it? Whereas if you go against the curve, it's like somebody brought out like a diet book recently that was like, right, counting calories doesn't work, like intermittent fasting is like the way forward, or it was going against what is popular at the moment, and that's what's going to get eyes on their content, because they're the people that have tried what's popular and then they go, no, that doesn't work, this is the way that's going to work. That's how they sell their books, that's how they sell their courses, that's how they, as you said, become the go-to person for XYZ, because they're going against the grain sort of thing. Whereas actually it depends is probably a better answer for kind of most questions.
Yeah, I suppose it's a sad indictment of where we're at in terms of people who want the easiest answer. So from a business perspective, going, okay, yeah, I can do that.
Yeah.
What's the best exercise? Squats. Next.
Yeah, totally. But I mean, there is that market for people that want to learn and improve. Otherwise, I think I wouldn't have a job, certainly. So
definitely. Well, I think we're coming up to the hour and a half mark. So amazing to chat to you today, Chris. I've definitely learned a lot. So yeah, me and Dan have always said if we kind of get guests on, we always want it to be people that we can learn from as well. We're not just going to kind of get anybody on. It's going to be people that are going to be a benefit to the audience. And I definitely think you've handed out some nuggets of information in there that's going to benefit everyone who does listen to this. So if people want to find you, like, do you have Instagram? Is there anywhere on Facebook? Like, where do people need to go if they want to learn more about the stuff that you do?
So it's the Move Well project, and it's Facebook or Instagram. And I have been a bit lazy recently, so I need to get back on a bit more content, to be fair. But yeah, you can message me through those platforms. Have a look at previous stuff from there.
Perfect. So yeah, I think that's about it. Unless you have you got anything to finish with, Dan? Or
I guess just next one. Do you train at home? Have you used a home gym? How do you find it?
At the moment, I am training. Yeah, well, I have been training at home a lot, but I'm doing some different stuff. So not max strength stuff. So I'm going all right.
Bringing kettlebells in the garage or something.
Pretty much, yeah. That and bodyweight stuff, and I'm actually doing some running, so everyone will hate me for that. But I did have to laugh. It was one of the things that came up over lockdown when I was just thinking, like, I kept seeing people putting barbells on wheelie bins so they could back squat and smashing the wheelie bins bits, and me thinking, okay, but if you can't clean or power clean enough to give you a meaningful weight to front squat for training, you've just identified your own problem and what you should be training. How are you resisting this so badly? But yeah, that's just my mentality.
Yeah, I think sometimes lockdown might have been a way to train outside how you normally would, think outside the box, maybe do some complexing, some metcons, some stuff like that. No, I've got to use the wheelie bins, spend £5,000 on equipment when I shouldn't, because I have. Yeah.
And then I've been made redundant when I come back to work, so I'm now in a lot of debt.
Oh God. But anyway, excellent speaking today, Chris. I really enjoyed that, and I think I could talk another hour or two. I think we'll hopefully get you back on at some point, and chat a bit more.
Thank you for having me. I do really appreciate it.
Oh, it was great. Really enjoyed having you on, man. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.